via.
When we talk about this idea of God's reset button, we're not talking about something magical in the way people often imagine, like a switch that makes all of our problems vanish overnight. What we're really describing is a fundamental shift in how you perceive the trajectory of your life. Because whether you look at it through the lens of neuroscience, psychology, or spiritual philosophy, the human story is one of renewal. We are wired to adapt, to heal, to recalibrate. The problem is that most of us forget this. We live as though every mistake, every failure, every misstep is permanent, as though the weight of our past cannot be lifted. But in reality, the capacity to reset is built into the very architecture of our minds and our spiritual nature. When God presses reset, it's not about erasing the past, it's about reframing it. Think about the brain for a moment. Neuroscience tells us that every experience we go through shapes neural pathways. Repeated behaviors carve grooves that make those behaviors more likely to occur again. That's why habits, whether good or destructive, feel so automatic. Now here's the fascinating part. When you deliberately choose to break that pattern, when you consciously align your thoughts and actions with something higher, something purposeful, you actually begin to rewire those pathways. That's neuroplasticity in action. So the reset isn't God waving away your history, it's God awakening in you the awareness and the strength to carve a new path forward. And yet, here's where Napoleon Hill becomes incredibly relevant. Hill wrote that every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. That's not just philosophy, it's psychology. The reset button doesn't remove adversity, it transforms it into material for growth. The pain of yesterday becomes the raw material for tomorrow's strength. If you can see that, if you can internalize that principle, then suddenly the narrative of your life shifts. You're not the victim of your circumstances, you're the architect of what comes next. But let's be honest, most people don't believe in that kind of transformation. They carry shame, regret, disappointment like weights on their back. They say, I've already messed up too many times, it's too late. That's not just negative thinking, it's a psychological trap. Cognitive science shows us that when people define themselves by their past mistakes, they lock themselves into what's called a fixed mindset. They believe their traits, their capacities, their destiny is already determined. And when you believe that, you stop looking for opportunities to reset. You stop believing a new chapter is possible. God's reset button cuts through that illusion. It's the reminder that your identity is not your history. You are not the sum of your mistakes. You are the sum of your choices moving forward. Spiritually, this is liberation. Psychologically, it's resilience. And in practice, it looks like this. You take the lesson from the failure, you extract the wisdom, and then you refuse to be chained to the narrative of defeat. That's the reset in motion. Now, let's make this practical. Think about a time you felt like you had reached the end of your rope. Maybe it was a relationship that collapsed, a career that derailed, or a personal battle with something like addiction, procrastination, or self-sabotage. In those moments, your mind wants to tell you, this is who I am. I'm the kind of person who fails. I'm the kind of person who can't get it right. But what if you paused there and instead of accepting that story, you reminded yourself that the reset button exists? Not as denial, not as escape, but as the opportunity to redefine what this failure means. That's where faith comes in, because faith is the bridge between what you see and what is possible. Faith is what allows you to take that raw material of failure and believe it can be turned into something constructive. In neuroscience, we'd call that belief a powerful form of expectancy. It literally changes the way your brain filters information. If you believe growth is possible, your brain starts noticing opportunities and patterns that support that belief. Faith primes the mind for transformation. So when you trust that God is resetting your story, you're not indulging in fantasy, you're engaging the mechanisms that actually make change real. But here's the catch. A reset doesn't feel like a clean slate at first. Often it feels uncomfortable, even chaotic. Think about restarting a computer. For a few moments the screen goes black, systems reboot, files reorganize. There's uncertainty in that gap, and that's exactly what happens when life resets. Old patterns dissolve, and in that in-between space, you feel exposed. You feel like you've lost your footing. That's not failure, that's the very evidence that a reset is underway. Napoleon Hill understood this. He called it the turning point of opportunity. Most people quit when the screen goes black. They interpret uncertainty as defeat. But those who hold steady, who stay grounded in faith and persistence, are the ones who see the new operating system emerge. And when it does, the story changes. One of the most profound aspects of God's reset is that it doesn't just transform your circumstances, it transforms your perception of them. And perception is everything. Two people can go through the same trial, yet one comes out bitter while the other comes out stronger. What's the difference? It's not the event itself, it's the meaning assigned to it. The one who believes in reset interprets pain as preparation. They see obstacles as shaping tools. That interpretation gives them resilience, while the other person remains stuck. This is why the reset button is so powerful. It's not about external events, it's about internal narrative. It's about rewriting the story you tell yourself about your own life. And when that story changes, everything else follows. Your habits, your relationships, your sense of possibility. Now let me pause here and challenge you directly. If you believe that God has a reset button, then ask yourself, what story am I clinging to that no longer serves me? What narrative am I repeating that keeps me stuck in the past? Because until you identify that script, you can't rewrite it. Awareness is the first step. God provides the reset, but you have to press it. You have to decide that the old story is over. And this is not just an abstract idea. Research shows that people who reframe their life experiences, who practice what psychologists call cognitive reappraisal, actually show lower stress, higher levels of well-being, and greater long-term achievement. It's not because the challenges disappeared, it's because the meaning shifted. That's the science of reset. Combine that with the faith of reset, the belief that God is for you, not against you, and you have a formula for transformation that no circumstance can defeat. The truth is, you are going to face moments when it feels like everything is collapsing. That's not the end of your story, that's the reset. The very moment you feel least qualified to start over is the moment you are most ready. Because humility, vulnerability, and brokenness are fertile soil for growth. Seeds don't grow on marble floors, they grow in broken ground. And your brokenness, if you let God use it, becomes the very soil from which new life emerges. So here's the takeaway. Don't fear the reset. Don't resist it. The pain, the failure, the uncertainty, they are not signs that you've lost. They are signs that something greater is being constructed. The old chapter has to close for the new one to open. And when it does, you will realize that none of the setbacks were wasted. Every single one was material for the reset, raw data for your growth, evidence that you were being prepared for more. The reset button is God's way of saying you are not finished, you are not defined by what was, you are defined by what can be. That's the truth. Napoleon Hill hinted at when he wrote about opportunity hidden in adversity. It's the truth neuroscience confirms when it shows us the brain can rewire itself. And it's the truth your spirit already knows, that renewal is not just possible, it is inevitable when you choose to believe in it. So the next time you feel like you failed beyond repair, remember this: the reset is already in progress. Your only task is to cooperate with it. Step forward, reframe the story, and trust that the hand pressing that button is wiser than your fear. Because in the end, the reset isn't about losing who you were, it's about uncovering who you were always meant to be. And that leaves us with a simple but profound reflection. If God has reset your story, the only question left is, what new story will you choose to write? If the first truth about God's reset button is that it offers you a new beginning, then the second truth is this: the reset only changes your life if you engage with it. And this is where many people miss the point. They wait for change to arrive as if God will simply deliver transformation without their participation. But life doesn't work that way, and neither does faith. A reset is not the same thing as an automatic upgrade. It's an invitation. You're handed a new script, but you still have to act it out. Napoleon Hill made this abundantly clear in his teachings. He said, "Definiteness of purpose is the starting point of all achievement." That's not passive language. It's a call to clarity and to commitment. Faith by itself opens the door to possibility, but without purposeful action, possibility remains just that, an idea, an unfulfilled vision. When God presses reset, the next step is yours. Think about this through the lens of psychology. Your brain has mechanisms designed to conserve energy. It favors familiar routines, even when those routines are destructive. This is why change feels hard. The reset button interrupts the old circuitry. But unless you choose to create and reinforce new patterns, your brain will default back to what it already knows. This is why some people receive moments of inspiration, profound clarity, or spiritual awakening, but within weeks they slip back into the same behaviors as before. It's not because the reset wasn't real, it's because they never coupled it with aligned action. Action is what carves the new grooves in the brain. Repetition is what makes those grooves deeper. That's neuroplasticity. But let's take it further. Aligned action isn't just doing something, it's doing the right things consistently, in a way that reflects your new identity. If God resets your story, but you keep rehearsing the same old habits, you're essentially dragging yesterday's script into today's performance. To live in the reset, you must act in ways that are congruent with the new chapter you claim to believe in. There's a philosophical principle here worth pausing on. In existential philosophy, freedom is always tied to responsibility. You are free to choose, but your choices carry weight. You are free to act, but if you refuse to act, you also accept the consequences of that refusal. Spiritually, God's reset gives you freedom. Psychologically, that freedom can feel overwhelming because it forces you to own your choices. And this is where discipline becomes sacred. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is the daily commitment that proves to your brain, your body, and your spirit that you are serious about the new path. Let's make this practical. Imagine you've just experienced a reset in the area of your health. You feel inspired, you sense that God has given you a chance to turn things around. That feeling is powerful, but it will not keep you healthy. What keeps you healthy is the daily choice to eat differently, move differently, rest differently. Over time, those choices reshape your body and your brain. The reset gave you the opportunity. Your action secures the result. Now think about relationships. Perhaps you've been carrying toxic patterns, cycles of mistrust, avoidance, or constant conflict. A divine reset can awaken you to the possibility of a different kind of connection. But the healing only becomes reality if you show up differently in conversations. If you practice listening instead of reacting, if you choose forgiveness over resentment, without those new actions, the old dynamics resurface. Again, the reset opens the door, but action is the step through the door. Napoleon Hill spoke repeatedly about persistence. Persistence is action sustained over time, especially in the face of resistance. Why is persistence so crucial? Because the reset button often disrupts not only your habits, but your environment. The people around you may not immediately believe in your new story. They've seen your old patterns. They may doubt your change. This is where persistence becomes the proof. You don't persuade others with words, you persuade them with consistent action. Over time, that persistence builds credibility, both with others and with yourself. And there's a deeper psychological truth here. Action generates belief more powerfully than belief generates action. We tend to think we must believe before we act. But research in behavioral psychology shows that acting as though you believe actually reinforces belief itself. In other words, if you want to solidify faith in your reset, start by acting like it's real. Your actions will feed back into your nervous system, confirming the identity you're stepping into. There's also an element of momentum here. Action builds momentum, and momentum builds confidence. Small steps consistently taken create a feedback loop that strengthens the reset. Too often people get paralyzed waiting for the big action that will change everything overnight. But the reset is strengthened not by one grand gesture, but by countless small daily acts of alignment. Each decision to show up differently is like a brick laid in the foundation of your new story. Over time, those bricks create a structure so solid that the old patterns can no longer collapse it. But let me challenge you here. Some of you may be tempted to wait for motivation before you act. That's a mistake. Motivation is fickle. It rises and falls with circumstances. What sustains action is not motivation, but commitment. Motivation is a feeling. Commitment is a decision. And once you decide, you act whether you feel like it or not. That's what builds the resilience required to live out a reset life. Faith, then, is not passive belief. Faith is belief expressed through action. When you say you trust God's reset, the evidence is in your behavior. Do you live as though your story has been reset? Do you make decisions that reflect the new identity, or do you drift back into the familiar? That's the test. Faith without action is merely sentiment. Faith with action is transformation. And there's one more layer to this worth considering. When you align action with faith, you're not only changing your own life, you're influencing the people around you. Human beings are social creatures. We model each other. Neuroscience tells us about mirror neurons, the systems in our brains that fire not only when we act, but when we see others act. That means your persistence, your daily discipline, your embodiment of the reset becomes contagious. You model possibility. You show others what it looks like to step into a new story. In this way, your action multiplies the impact of God's reset far beyond yourself. So let's put it together. God presses reset, giving you a new beginning. Faith is the inner trust that this new beginning is real. But it's aligned action, purposeful, disciplined, persistent action that turns that beginning into a lived reality. Without action, the reset fades into memory. With action, the reset becomes the foundation of a new life. The profound challenge and the profound opportunity is to recognize that every day you are faced with choices that either affirm the reset or undermine it. Every habit is a vote for the person you are becoming. Every decision is evidence of the story you're writing. And over time, those small votes accumulate into a life that either reflects the reset or denies it. This is why Hill was insistent on definiteness of purpose. If you don't know your purpose, your actions scatter. They lack alignment. But when your purpose is clear, every action becomes a step in the same direction. Purpose organizes your behavior, it eliminates distractions, it sharpens your discipline, and when combined with faith in God's reset, purpose-driven action becomes unstoppable. So here's the reality. You are not waiting on God to do more. God has already pressed reset. The question is whether you will act in a way that honors that gift. Will you discipline your mind, your habits, your choices so that they reflect the new story? Or will you drift back into the old narrative out of comfort and fear? The reset is not a guarantee. It's an opportunity. What you do with it is entirely up to you. And that brings us to the final thought. If you believe God has reset your story, then the most important question you can ask yourself each day is simple. What action today reflects the story I want to live tomorrow? Answer that question daily with clarity and persistence, and your life will not just tell a new story, it will embody it. So I'll leave you with this. Faith is the spark, but action is the flame. And if you keep feeding that flame, it will light a path so bright that the darkness of your past will never define you again.